Studebaker was bold, strange, and ahead of its time, and some of its wildest creations vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Built in silence, sold in tiny numbers, then buried by history, these are the Studebakers most people never knew existed. The 1964 Studebaker Gran Turismo Hawk R2 Supercharged is one of the most tragic, awe-inspiring, and overlooked relics of America's muscle and style legacy, a car born not in celebration, but in desperation. It wasn't merely a performance version of a stylish coupe. It was a defiant war cry from a once great automaker standing on the edge of oblivion. Studebaker was crumbling. The boardrooms in South Bend were filled with fear and confusion. The factories were echoing with uncertainty. And yet, in this final chapter, a few visionary engineers and designers managed to create something extraordinary, perhaps the most powerful and rarest Studebaker ever built, the R2 Hawk. To understand the R2, you first have to understand its skeleton, the Gran Turismo Hawk. Originally launched in 1962, the GT Hawk was Studebaker's attempt to inject some life into its aging Hawk series, which had roots going back to the early 1950s. The design was massaged by none other than the legendary Raymond Loewy's team, giving the car a European Grand Tourer profile with American scale and flair. It wore a long, low hood, a squared-off roofline, and a tail that carried both elegance and weight. It looked like something a 1960s executive would drive through a noir film set, equal parts menace and grace. But by 1964, the GT Hawk was more than just dated. It was an artifact in a showroom full of muscle-bound newcomers. Pontiac had unleashed the GTO. Ford was preparing the Mustang. The Corvette was entering its golden era. Studebaker, meanwhile, was fighting to stay alive. And then, seemingly from nowhere, came the R2. Developed in parallel with the high-performance versions of the Avanti, the R2 package was a masterpiece of mechanical audacity. It featured a heavily built 289 cubic inch V8, not just a warmed-over version, but one purpose-built for speed. Atop this engine sat a Paxton centrifugal supercharger, whistling and shrieking with compressed fury. It pushed out an advertised 290 horsepower, but many believe the real number was north of 300. It ran on high-octane fuel, came with heavy-duty internals, and could, if provoked, shove the hefty Hawk to 140 mph at a time when most full-size sedans couldn't even dream of triple digits. But this was no drag strip bruiser. The Gran Turismo Hawk was still wrapped in tailored sheet metal, draped in chrome, and fitted with an upscale interior. Bucket seats, a full-gauge cluster, and upscale trim made it feel more like a European GT car than an American muscle car. In that sense, it was a philosophical rival to the Pontiac Grand Prix, but with far more exclusivity and a raw bite. Studebaker didn't have the marketing budget to shout about it. There were no Super Bowl commercials, no magazine centerfolds, and no celebrity endorsements. There was only a quiet storm of engineering brilliance that most of America never even heard rumble. Production numbers tell the saddest part of the story. Out of thousands of GT Hawks made, fewer than 100 were built with the R2 supercharged engine. Some estimates say 70. Others, fewer than 50, survive today in any condition. No two historians agree, because even Studebaker itself was in disarray at the time. Record-keeping was haphazard. Some R2s were misbadged or miscatalogued. Some were dealer-installed conversions. Most disappeared into the fog of history without anyone realizing what they were. By the end of 1963, Studebaker's South Bend plant was shuttered. By early 1964, the American chapter of Studebaker was effectively closed. The company limped on in Canada for a short while longer, but the R2 program was already dead. The R2 Hawk didn't just represent the end of a model, it was the end of an era. Driving an R2 today, if you're lucky enough to find one, is like stepping into a time capsule sealed under pressure. The engine snarls awake, the supercharger whining softly under load, waiting to deliver its compressed thunder. The ride is firm but composed. The handling surprisingly sure-footed for a car with its roots in the mid-1950s. You can feel the desperation in the welds, the care in the engine tuning, the fire of engineers who knew this might be their last great work. Every touch point, every chrome accent, every flicker of boost pressure feels like a final love letter to the American car industry from one of its most inventive and embattled creators. Collectors who know what they're looking at speak about the R2 with reverence. It's not just about rarity, it's about meaning. It's a car that shouldn't exist. A car that came from a company with no budget, no future, and no business building something this bold. But they did it anyway. They did it because performance mattered, because beauty mattered, because pride mattered. Today, the 1964 Studebaker Gran Turismo Hawk R2 Supercharged is among the most elusive and poignant high-performance American cars ever built. Not because it beat the big names on paper, but because it dared to try. The 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk was the kind of car that arrived too soon for its own good, a machine decades ahead in concept, but released into a world not yet ready to embrace its bold mixture of performance and luxury. It was a meteor across the post-war sky, a ferocious grand touring coupe built not by one of Detroit's big three, but by the underdog automaker from South Bend. Where others were still fiddling with Finn and family sedans, Studebaker dared to build something different, something radical. And what emerged was a car that not only challenged the norms of its time, but helped invent a whole new category, the personal luxury muscle coupe. At a glance, the 1956 Golden Hawk was a contradiction. It had the graceful, long-hooded silhouette of a European GT car, yet its face carried a bold, almost aggressive upright grille and a stance that screamed confidence. Its tail fins were not overdone like a Cadillac's, but rather sculpted into the body like the flick of a designer's wrist. Chrome was everywhere, but not tastelessly applied. It gleamed like armor on a knight. Its colors ranged from earth tones to bold two-tone schemes that made it stand out even in a parking lot full of mid-century giants. This was not your average 50s cruiser. This was something far more focused, something dangerous. Under that long, sculpted hood lay the heart of a lion, a 352 cubic inch Packard V8 engine, an engine borrowed not from some basic economy car, but from the upper ranks of American luxury. It was massive, brutish, and beautiful, delivering a raw 275 horsepower, an astonishing number in 1956. This wasn't just a cruiser, it was a bullet dressed in gold. With a power-to-weight ratio that rivaled the Corvette, the Golden Hawk was one of the fastest production cars on the American road that year. 0 to 60 in around 7.8 seconds may not sound like much today, but in the mid-1950s, that was blistering. It beat Thunderbirds off the line. It embarrassed Buicks at the stoplight. And it did all of that with an automatic transmission, leather seats, and a dash that looked like it belonged in a fighter jet. But here's the tragedy. The world didn't quite know what to do with it. To some, the Golden Hawk was too brash, too fast, too aggressive for a luxury car. To others, it was too plush, too heavy, too refined to be a real performance machine. It existed in a strange middle space that hadn't yet been defined. The niche that cars like the Buick Riviera, Ford Thunderbird, and even the later Pontiac Grand Prix would eventually dominate. In that way, the Golden Hawk was a prophet without a congregation. Buyers were intrigued but confused. Some loved it. Others passed it by, unsure whether it was a sports car in a suit or a luxury car with a hot rod heart. It didn't help that Studebaker was already fighting for its life. The company had merged with Packard, but the two brands were on unsteady footing. Resources were limited, marketing budgets were tiny, and dealership networks were weak compared to the behemoths in Detroit. And while the Golden Hawk was one of the most advanced and exciting cars of its day, it came with a price tag that scared off economy-minded buyers, and styling that was perhaps just a little too aggressive for the country club set. Production numbers reflected this struggle. Just 4,071 Golden Hawks were built in 1956. The following year, Studebaker switched to a smaller 289 engine with a supercharger to replace the Packard V8. Cheaper, yes, but also less refined. The magic of that initial Packard-powered version was gone, and by the early 1960s, the entire Hawk line was on its last legs. The final GT Hawk bowed in 1964, just as the company itself faded into memory. Today, the 1956 Golden Hawk is a unicorn, seldom seen outside of high-end classic car auctions or private collections. It's a car that demands appreciation, not just for its rarity, but for what it represents. A moment in time when Studebaker, outgunned and outspent, decided to do something no one else dared. They built a car that was luxurious without being soft, powerful without being crude, and stunning without being gaudy. It's no exaggeration to say that the Golden Hawk helped shape what the American muscle luxury coupe would one day become. But while the GTOs and Mustangs get the headlines and the Thunderbirds get the nostalgic glory, the Golden Hawk waits in the shadows. Quiet, beautiful, and just a little dangerous. The one that came first. The one that roared before the world was ready to listen. The 1963 Studebaker Avanti R3 isn't just a rare car, it's a fever dream that somehow escaped into reality. It stands at the intersection of aerospace fantasy, outlaw muscle, and the desperate genius of a company trying to cheat death. If most muscle cars of the 1960s were forged in chrome and machismo, the Avanti R3 was cast in desperation and pure engineering audacity. It was never meant to exist in large numbers. It wasn't built to chase mass appeal. It was a moonshot, an experimental beast wrapped in fiberglass, designed to prove that Studebaker could still go toe-to-toe with the best in America, even as the walls of the company were collapsing around it. To understand the R3, you have to understand the chaos it was born into. By the early 1960s, Studebaker was already limping. Sales were down, morale was low, and dealers were closing. Management needed a miracle, and fast. Enter Sherwood Egbert, a charismatic, cigar-chomping executive who had no traditional automotive background, but had a burning vision. He didn't want just another family sedan. He wanted a halo car, something sexy, something wild, something that looked like it had dropped out of a jet-age dream. So he flew to Palm Springs, knocked on the door of famed industrial designer Raymond Loewy, and said, "We need something stunning, and we need it now." Loewy and his team delivered. In just 40 days, they penned the Avanti, a swooping, low-slung, fiberglass-bodied wonder that looked like nothing else on the road. It had no grille, just a gaping intake under the front bumper. It had a fastback roofline and a cockpit-style interior with full instrumentation. It looked more Italian than Indiana-born. But while the style was thrilling, what lay under the hood, especially in the R3, was even more astonishing. The R3 was not your grandfather's Studebaker. It was a hand-built weapon of speed. It took the 304.5 cubic inch V8 from the more common R2, already supercharged, and dialed everything up to 11. The R3 block was heavily reinforced and fitted with forged internals. It got a special high-lift camshaft, improved cooling, a dual-point ignition system, and a crankshaft balanced to aircraft-grade tolerances. Air was force-fed into it by a Paxton centrifugal supercharger, and the result was over 335 horsepower. Some sources say closer to 350 in test trim. That was Corvette Stingray territory. That was Shelby Cobra territory. And the Avanti, unlike most American cars, was designed with high-speed stability in mind. Studebaker engineers tested the car at Bonneville, where R3 prototypes flirted with the jaw-dropping 170 mile, with official records near 168. Let that sink in for a moment. In 1963, before the GTO, for the Hemi Chargers, before the Mustang GT350, Studebaker had a fiberglass-bodied, wind-tunnel sculpted coupe capable of 160-plus mph, built in Indiana by a dying company. And it was street legal. But the R3's story is more myth than market reality. Only 9 factory-built R3 Avantis were ever produced. 9 Harman. That makes it one of the rarest factory performance cars in American history. Studebaker simply didn't have the resources to mass produce them. They didn't have the advertising dollars or the dealer confidence or the manufacturing strength. Worse still, the fiberglass bodies, produced by Molded Fiberglass in Ohio, the same company that made Corvette bodies, were plagued with fit and finish issues. Production delays, mounting costs, and internal turmoil doomed the Avanti project almost before it got off the ground. By the end of 1963, South Bend was shuttered. Studebaker moved operations to Canada and canceled the Avanti altogether. The R3 program vanished overnight. A handful of engines and parts were left in limbo. Some were installed post-factory. Some were hoarded by collectors. But the 9 true documented R3 Avantis are holy grails now. Vehicles that only surface in whispered conversations at high-end auctions or among serious collectors of the obscure. Driving an R3 today is a surreal experience. The supercharger begins to howl around 3,000 RPM, building pressure with the kind of mechanical urgency you usually only feel in race cars. The acceleration is immediate, raw, and surprisingly stable at speed. The car feels light and balanced, thanks in part to its fiberglass body, and the cockpit, though dated, wraps around you like a fighter jet. It's a car that makes you forget it was built by a company gasping its last breath. For that moment, behind the wheel, the R3 feels like victory. The 1963 Studebaker Avanti R3 wasn't just fast for its time, it was almost prophetic. It predicted the rise of factory-tuned supercars, the blend of speed and style, and the obsession with low-volume, high-impact performance icons. It was the American Lotus Esprit before such a concept even existed. It's not just a Studebaker, it's a symbol of what happens when engineers are given freedom, when designers are given trust. The 1951 Studebaker Commander V8 is a ghost from the moment when America stood at the brink of a horsepower revolution and missed a chance to give credit where it was truly due. Overshadowed by GM, outspent by Ford, and outsold by Chrysler, Studebaker was the forgotten pioneer, the small-town engineer in a world of industrial giants. Yet, in 1951, they pulled off something extraordinary. In the ruins of post-war production, before the dawn of the muscle car era, they introduced one of the first truly modern overhead valve V8s in an American passenger car. It was fast, it was ahead of its time, and it vanished from the collective memory as if it had never mattered. But it did matter, and if history were a little fairer, the 1951 Commander V8 would be remembered not as a curiosity, but as a trailblazer. To grasp how radical this move was, consider the landscape of American automotive engineering in the early 1950s. Most automakers were still leaning heavily on pre-war flathead technology. It was cheap, reliable, and proven. But by 1951, it was outdated. The auto industry was cautiously emerging from wartime production constraints, and everyone was waiting for GM or Ford to take the next leap. Nobody expected Studebaker, a small independent based in South Bend, Indiana, to beat them to it. But beat them they did. The 1951 Commander debuted with a 232.6 cubic inch OHV V8 designed in-house. This was not just a warmed-over pre-war lump with new chrome trim. It was a compact, efficient, high-revving engine that produced 120 horsepower, enough to give the Commander a power-to-weight ratio that rivaled or surpassed many of its contemporaries. In fact, Motor Trend declared the 51 Commander V8 the fastest American sedan they had tested that year. It was light, it handled well, and it could cruise at highway speeds all day when others were still laboring to get there. This was more than engineering. This was a statement. The car itself reflected the boldness of its drivetrain. Studebaker's post-war styling, often credited to industrial designer Raymond Loewy and his team, was years ahead of Detroit's mainstream offerings, with its low, sleek silhouette and futuristic bullet nose. A carryover from 1950, the Commander looked like something out of a Buck Rogers serial. It was daring, too daring perhaps, for an audience that still clung to the familiarity of big, upright grills and chrome-laden fenders. But to those who appreciated it, the Commander wasn't just another family car. It was a glimpse of the future. And yet, it wasn't enough. Studebaker lacked the marketing power of GM. They didn't have the dealer network of Ford or the industrial muscle of Chrysler. Within 2 years, the Big Three had responded. Chevy rolled out its small block V8 in 1955, and Ford followed with its Y block. These engines got the attention, the sales, and the credit. The Commander V8 became yesterday's news almost overnight. Studebaker's innovation, like so much of its legacy, was swept away in the flood of post-war consumerism and corporate consolidation. By the mid-1950s, Studebaker was already losing ground. Sales slipped, competition intensified, and corporate infighting drained resources. Even as the Commander V8 quietly evolved and improved, it was never seen as a leader again. The spotlight had moved elsewhere. The same engine layout that once put Studebaker ahead of the pack now became standard fare in every driveway, just without the South Bend badge. Today, the 1951 Commander V8 is a rare sight, mostly found at niche collector meets or hidden under dust in Midwestern barns. It's not the first name that comes up in V8 history, and that's a shame. Because without the boldness of that little Indiana company, without the decision to take a chance when others hesitated, the American V8 revolution might have arrived a little later or a little less bravely. The 1951 Studebaker Commander V8 wasn't a failure. It was a flare fired into the night sky, bright, brilliant, and all too brief. It deserves to be remembered not for the silence that followed, but for the signal it sent, that even the underdog could shape the future, if only for a moment. The 1957 Studebaker President Classic Broadmoor is the kind of car that whispers its story through time, a forgotten symbol of a company grasping for prestige in a market that was already closing its doors. In a decade dominated by chrome-laden giants from the Big Three, Studebaker's attempt to craft a full-size luxury sedan that could compete with the best Detroit had to offer was as bold as it was doomed. The Broadmoor was the final ornate expression of a dream, the idea that a small independent could still play in the big leagues of American luxury motoring. The name President had once meant something. Throughout the 1930s and into the early post-war years, it stood at the top of Studebaker's hierarchy. More than a model name, it was a declaration of intent. And in 1957, Studebaker took that intent to its limit with the President Classic in Broadmoor trim, a vehicle designed not just to transport, but to impress. On the outside, the Broadmoor edition looked every bit the part of a prestige sedan. Its most striking visual feature was its sweeping, wraparound rear glass, a panoramic rear window that gave the car a light-filled, almost futuristic greenhouse look. Studebaker was already known for daring design moves, but this element gave the Broadmoor an airy, high-roofed profile unlike anything else in its class. From the front, the car carried the bold, wide Studebaker grille, with quad headlamps flanking a sculpted hood, evoking the optimism and rocket-age flair of the late 50s. But it was inside the cabin where Studebaker made its most serious appeal to luxury buyers. The Broadmoor trim featured thick pile carpets, intricate dashboard detailing, padded door panels, and rich upholstery that could be had in a variety of color and fabric combinations. There were extra chrome accents, additional courtesy lighting, and upgraded soundproofing. It was a quiet car, stately and composed, built to give the impression of calm sophistication. Even the name Broadmoor was a deliberate nod toward high-end elegance, likely borrowed from the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, a famed luxury destination for the elite. Mechanically, the President Classic came equipped with Studebaker's top-tier drivetrain. It was powered by a 289 cubic inch V8 producing around 210 horsepower, paired with either a column-shifted manual or the Borg-Warner Flight-O-Matic automatic transmission. The ride was smooth, aided by a long 125-inch wheelbase and independent front suspension. It wasn't a performance car by any means, but it didn't need to be. It was meant to glide. And yet, for all its effort and attention to detail, the Broadmoor never caught on. The reasons were complex and painful. By 1957, Studebaker was already bleeding financially. Years of lagging sales, rising production costs, and an increasingly aggressive GM Ford Chrysler juggernaut had left the company in a defensive crouch. Consumers were wary of buying from a brand that might not be around to honor a warranty. And though the President Broadmoor was priced competitively, it simply couldn't match the brand cachet of a Cadillac, Lincoln, or even a Chrysler New Yorker. Worse still, the market for large, expensive Studebakers was vanishing. Buyers who wanted flash and finned opulence went elsewhere, and those seeking practicality turned to more modest, affordable options like the Lark or Champion. The Broadmoor was caught in a no-man's land, too ambitious for budget-conscious buyers, too obscure for prestige hunters. Production numbers were low from the start, and no official tally exists today for just how many President Classics were built in the Broadmoor configuration. Some historians estimate fewer than 1,000 were ever produced, and fewer than 100 are thought to survive today. They are almost never seen at car shows, rarely appear at auctions, and are virtually unknown even to many Studebaker enthusiasts. What's left then is memory, faint, scattered, half forgotten. The President Broadmoor is the kind of car that shows up in an old black and white family photo, parked behind a smiling couple in front of a suburban ranch house. Its roofline just visible through the grain of time. It's a vehicle that reminds us how even the most well-intentioned dreams of greatness can be undone by timing, competition, and the cruel logic of the market. And yet, for a brief moment in 1957, Studebaker gave it everything. The Broadmoor was their last, finest breath of elegance in a rapidly closing room. It did not survive, but it mattered, because it proved that even as the world moved on, Studebaker never stopped reaching upward. And if that isn't luxury, what is? The 1960 Studebaker Lark V8 Regal Convertible is a fascinating piece of automotive history that tells a story of ambition, innovation, and the harsh realities faced by a struggling independent automaker. In the late 1950s, Studebaker found itself in dire straits. Its lineup was aging, sales were declining, and the company was struggling to stay relevant against the overwhelming dominance of the big three: General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. Enter the Lark, a compact car designed with the hope of revitalizing the brand and appealing to a market that was rapidly shifting towards smaller, more economical vehicles. The Lark was bold and practical. It was compact yet surprisingly spacious inside, nimble on the road, and offered a variety of body styles that appealed to a broad range of customers. But the star of the lineup was undoubtedly the V8 Regal Convertible, a car that combined style, power, and open-air driving excitement in a way few compacts dared to at the time. The Regal Convertible was sleek and sporty, with clean lines and a distinct personality that set it apart from the more conservative offerings of the big three compacts, like the Ford Falcon and Plymouth Valiant. Under the hood, the Lark 8 Regal Convertible packed a respectable V8 engine that gave it enough muscle to make driving fun without sacrificing the compact practicality that was key to its mission. The car was quick, responsive, and well-balanced, making it a standout among compacts for those who wanted more than just basic transportation. Its convertible top added a touch of glamour and freedom, appealing to buyers who crave style without the bulk and expense of full-size cars. Despite these strengths, the Lark was fighting an uphill battle. The big three had vast resources, extensive dealer networks, and strong customer loyalty, making it difficult for Studebaker to compete. While the Lark initially enjoyed decent sales and even generated excitement for the brand, it simply wasn't enough. Production costs, limited marketing budgets, and the pressure to constantly update and innovate strained Studebaker's already thin resources. The Lark couldn't keep pace with the ever-evolving models from Detroit, and its moment in the spotlight was fleeting. As the 1960s progressed, the Lark 8 Regal Convertible gradually faded from view. It was overshadowed by the more aggressively marketed, mass-produced compacts from Ford, Chrysler, and GM. Where Falcons and Valiants became household names, the Lark remained a niche player, appreciated by enthusiasts, but largely forgotten by the general public. Its rarity today makes surviving examples coveted among collectors who recognize the car's unique place in automotive history. The story of the 1960s Studebaker Lark 8 Regal Convertible is more than just the tale of a stylish compact with a powerful V8. It's a reflection of the challenges faced by smaller automakers trying to survive in a rapidly consolidating industry. It's a story of resilience and innovation, of a car designed to save a company and almost succeeding. But ultimately, it's also a reminder of how tough the automotive world can be, where even great ideas and solid engineering can be overwhelmed by bigger competitors. In its day, the Lark 8 Regal Convertible was a beacon of hope for Studebaker, a chance to prove that smaller, independent automakers could still make a mark. Though it didn't save the company, It left behind a legacy of charm, style, and spirited performance that endears it to collectors and historians today. This car, with its graceful lines and V8 power, remains a symbol of ambition and the bittersweet struggle to stay relevant in the face of overwhelming odds. It's a rare glimpse into an era when American carmakers fought fiercely to define the future, and the Lark was Studebaker's last great shot at that dream. The 1962 Studebaker Daytona Sky Coupe is one of those rare, captivating stories in American automotive history that embodies both ambition and tragedy, a unique blend of sportiness, luxury, and forward-thinking design that ultimately slipped through the cracks of a tumultuous era. While the name Daytona is now firmly associated with Dodge's muscle cars and NASCAR fame, Studebaker's use of it predates all of that, giving it a fascinating pedigree that few remember today. But the story of the Skytop Coupe is much more than just a name. It's about a company fighting to innovate and stay relevant against overwhelming odds, and a car that dared to be unlike anything else on the road at the time. In the early 1960s, Studebaker was struggling. Once a major player in the American auto industry, it was now grappling with declining sales, shrinking resources, and stiff competition from the Detroit Giants. The company desperately needed something fresh, something that could capture the public's imagination and breathe new life into the brand. The Daytona Skytop Coupe was that attempt. Bold, stylish, and filled with features that were ahead of their time. What set the Daytona apart immediately was its stunning glass roof design. Unlike the traditional coupe rooflines of the era, the Skytop featured a sweeping rear glass panel combined with a sliding fabric sunroof, creating an airy, open feeling inside the cabin without sacrificing the sleek, aerodynamic profile. This was a daring design choice, something more reminiscent of European Grand Tourers than a typical American car. And it gave the Daytona a signature look that turned heads. It was as if Studebaker was trying to redefine what a sporty luxury coupe could be, elegant yet adventurous. Inside, the Daytona didn't disappoint. Studebaker equipped the car with bucket seats that hugged occupants comfortably, giving a nod to performance driving and adding an intimate, cockpit-like feel. The console-mounted shifter further enhanced that sporty vibe, offering drivers a sense of control and engagement rare in cars marketed as luxury or comfortable cruisers. The interior was designed to blend refinement with function, striking a balance that promised both style and spirited driving. The use of quality materials and thoughtful ergonomics made the cabin feel upscale, but without the over-the-top opulence that some competitors favored. Underneath its distinctive bodywork, the Daytona was powered by Studebaker's reliable engines that, while not muscle car beasts, offered respectable performance. The V8 engines available provided enough power to make the car lively and enjoyable on twisty roads, distinguishing it from the typical economy cars crowding the market. Its relatively compact size made it agile and nimble, traits that enhanced the driving experience and gave the car a youthful edge. The Daytona wasn't just a pretty face. It was built to be a genuine driver's car in the spirit of the emerging pony and muscle car culture of the early 60s. But as promising as the Daytona was, it was doomed by forces far beyond its design. Studebaker was suffering financially and lacked the marketing muscle and dealer network strength to push the car into the spotlight. Advertising campaigns were sparse and ineffective, leaving the public largely unaware of the Daytona's unique qualities. Moreover, the company's focus was divided as it tried to manage other models and cut costs, leaving the Skytop without the full support it needed to flourish. Production numbers for the Daytona Skytop Coupe were disappointingly low, making it an immediate rarity even during its brief run. This scarcity, combined with the lack of promotion, meant the car quickly vanished from showrooms and public attention. It never had the chance to build a strong following or legacy during its production years, and as Studebaker's troubles worsened, the Daytona became another footnote in the company's fading story. Looking back, the 1962 Studebaker Daytona Skytop Coupe feels like a glimpse into a what-if moment, a car that could have been a standout classic if circumstances had been different. It combined innovation in design, a spirited driving experience, and a unique blend of luxury and sportiness that was rare for American cars of that era. Today, it is highly prized among collectors and enthusiasts who recognize its singular place in automotive history, a symbol of Studebaker's willingness to push boundaries despite the odds stacked against them. The Daytona story is also a poignant reminder of the brutal realities in the automotive industry, where even the most creative and well-executed vehicles can be doomed by financial woes, poor marketing, and fierce competition. It represents the fading hope of an independent automaker striving to keep its identity alive and relevant in a changing world dominated by larger corporations. The 1947 Studebaker champion Starlight Coupe stands as one of the most daring and visionary designs to emerge from the American automotive world in the aftermath of World War II, a time when the country was eager to embrace innovation but also clung to tradition. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a radical leap into the future at a moment when most manufacturers were content to produce safe, familiar vehicles that looked largely like pre-war models with a fresh coat of paint. But Studebaker, under the guidance of the legendary industrial designer Raymond Loewy, chose a dramatically different path. The result was the Starlight Coupe, a vehicle so revolutionary in both form and spirit that it could have been mistaken for a sleek rocket ship or a spacecraft beaming down from another planet. The defining feature of the Starlight Coupe was its extraordinary wraparound rear window, a massive curved glass panel that extended from the C-pillar around the back of the car, providing a nearly 180-degree view. This wasn't just a stylistic flourish, it was a radical reimagining of how a car cabin could feel. Instead of the closed-off claustrophobic quarters typical of cars from that era, the Starlight's interior was flooded with natural light, creating an airy, almost panoramic experience for passengers. This feature alone made the car feel years ahead of its time and gave it a futuristic vibe that set it miles apart from any other automobile on the road. Beyond the window, the entire shape of the car was sleek and aerodynamic, with smooth, flowing lines that suggested speed and progress even when standing still. The car's torpedo-like profile was a striking departure from the boxy, upright designs of the day, signaling a new direction in automotive styling that emphasized motion and modernity. The front grille, though restrained, complemented the streamlined body, while subtle chrome accents added a touch of elegance without overwhelming the design. Yet for all its beauty and innovation, the Starlight Coupe's radical design then also became its greatest challenge. At a time when buyers were more comfortable with the familiar and the safe, the car's futuristic aesthetics confused and even alienated many potential customers. It was a car that required a leap of faith from buyers, a willingness to embrace the new and the unknown. Unfortunately, the American car market in the late 1940s was still largely conservative, and this forward-thinking masterpiece struggled to find its place among the more conventional sedans and coupes. Sales were respectable, but far from spectacular, and the market's hesitation forced Studebaker to tone down its bold styling in subsequent years. By the early 1950s, the sweeping rear glass was reduced, and the bodyline softened, as the company sought to appeal to broader tastes and compete with the big three automakers. This retreat from radical design marked the end of one of the most original and exciting automotive experiments of the post-war era. The Starlight Coupe, with all its futuristic bravado, became a fleeting glimpse of what could have been, a bright flash of innovation that faded before it could fully flourish. Today, the 1947 Studebaker Champion Starlight Coupe is a prized gem among collectors, not simply because of its rarity, but because it represents an era when automotive design was fearless and visionary. It is a tangible reminder of a time when designers and engineers dared to break the mold, dreaming of cars that could look and feel like something out of science fiction. The car's legacy lives on as a symbol of creativity and ambition, a beautiful artifact from a moment when American car makers flirted with the future and dared to be different. In a world now flooded with retro-styled and futuristic concept cars, the Starlight Coupe's story resonates with a special kind of poignancy. It wasn't just a car ahead of its time, it was a risk, a gamble on the future that didn't pay off in sales but left an indelible mark on automotive history. For those who encounter it today, the Starlight is more than just a beautifully designed vehicle. It is a piece of American industrial art, a symbol of hope and innovation, and a reminder that sometimes being too far ahead of your time means your brilliance won't be fully recognized until decades later. The 1966 Studebaker Cruiser holds a unique and deeply poignant place in automotive history, representing not just the end of a model, but the closing chapter of an American automotive icon. Studebaker, once a beacon of innovation and daring design in the industry, had been struggling for years by the mid-1960s. With the company's U.S. operations shuttered, the mantle of survival was carried solely by the Canadian plant in Hamilton, Ontario, a last stand in a desperate fight to keep a storied name alive. The Cruiser was the final sedan produced by Studebaker, a car that quietly rolled off the assembly lines, not with fanfare or celebration, but as a sober, humble farewell to a legacy that had begun almost a century earlier. From the very beginning, Studebaker had distinguished itself through a willingness to innovate and push boundaries. In its heyday, the company was a true pioneer, known for aerodynamic styling, advanced engineering, and a rebellious spirit that set it apart from the Detroit Giants. The 1947 Starlight Coupe's wraparound rear window and streamlined silhouette were just a few examples of Studebaker's willingness to challenge norms and reimagine what a car could be. But the tides had shifted dramatically by the 1960s. The industry was dominated by the big three automakers, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, who had the production scale, dealer networks, and financial muscle to outcompete smaller players. Studebaker found itself increasingly outmatched and financially strained, caught in a downward spiral that was difficult to reverse. The 1966 Cruiser was, in many ways, a symbol of that struggle. Mechanically, it was a solid, if unremarkable car, powered by a Chevrolet-sourced 283 cubic inch V8 engine that gave it a respectable but hardly spectacular performance. The car was well-trimmed and offered decent features for its time, but these qualities could not mask the harsh reality. The brand was no longer relevant to the rapidly evolving automotive marketplace. The Cruiser's design was conventional and safe, a far cry from the bold and futuristic cars that had once defined Studebaker's identity. It lacked the innovation and excitement that had made the brand famous, instead standing as a practical, reliable, but ultimately uninspired product, struggling to find buyers in a crowded field. Only about 3,000 Cruisers were built before the final hammer fell and Studebaker's production lines went silent forever. The Cruiser's low production numbers make it a rare and somber relic, a poignant reminder of a once great company's decline. It was not a car that ended with a roar, but rather with a whisper, a quiet, dignified exit that spoke volumes about the challenges faced by smaller automakers trying to survive in an industry increasingly dominated by consolidation and mass production. For enthusiasts and historians, the 1966 Studebaker Cruiser is much more than just a car. It is a tangible artifact of an era when American automotive dreams were both bold and fragile, a symbol of a company that fought to maintain its identity and dignity against overwhelming odds. It represents the bittersweet reality of innovation and ambition, meeting the brutal economics of the marketplace, and it stands as a tribute to Studebaker's long history of creativity, resilience, and determination. Today, the Cruiser remains a piece of automotive history that evokes a deep sense of nostalgia and respect. It tells the story of a company that once dared to be different and dream big, but ultimately had to bow out gracefully, leaving behind a legacy of daring design and indomitable spirit. In a world where modern cars are often stripped of character and individuality, the 1966 Studebaker Cruiser reminds us of a time when cars carried the soul of their makers, when every vehicle told a story, and when even an ending could be meaningful, quietly echoing the passion and pride of those who built it. The Cruiser's final journey was not just the end of a car, but the closing of a remarkable chapter in American automotive history, one that continues to inspire and resonate decades later.